Writing cleaner code is a great thing to constantly be thinking about and learning how you can do better at. So as you're writing, you'll know that the application or the program you're working on is going to grow. The project's going to grow over time. And the more code that exists, the more we're going to be reading code instead of writing code. So when it comes to being consistent and clear and descriptive, when you come back to your code 5 months from now, you can come back and hopefully being able to determine what's going on, everything is clean and well described and well commented, and you can always return and get back to work. Same thing as if another developer entered into the project for the first time, they would also understand what's going on. And so one way to do that is writing cleaner code, and I've got a few rules inside of a repo. So let's get started. So in this repo of write cleaner code, I've given a few examples that you can play with, and you can kind of get the idea of what's bad and then try to go in there and make it better. And some of these are going to be personal preference of how you might approach writing cleaner code. And the important part is the next developer that comes in, which might be you on another project, is that you're going to come in and write the same way that the original developer was coding it in. And that's keeping that consistency over time. So let's run through these rules really quick, and then we'll go through at least an example or two. So first is writing descriptive names. You don't want to be writing your variables or functions, do this thing or A plus B equals C. Those don't mean much. And so giving some names are going to be important, whether it's adding the cost plus the markup plus the tax equals the total amount that the customer is going to pay. And not that, you get the idea is that when you're writing your variables, writing your functions, be descriptive. Next is each class has one job to do. So if you're going to be collecting tips and you're going to be giving a total of tips for the day for a waiter, then you don't want to go ahead and give them the total and the average of their tips. You only want to give them the total if that function has been called. And so same thing, if you create a function or a class, that was a simple example, but at least only have that function or class do one thing. Next is refactor code, so there's less of it. So it's not that you need to be so concise that it's unreadable, but at least to be concise enough to where it's the smallest amount of lines to be able to consume what's going on, and then being able to take action on that function if something needed to be added or changed or updated. So in way of writing less code, you don't want to be clever, but you do want to make sure that it's readable. And comments are a really great way to communicate to yourself later down the road and also to another developer that what's going on in the code and what maybe what's possible, what can be expected from certain lines and certain groups of lines of code. So last but not least, there's several more that we could probably come up with, but be consistent with the code styling. And so it's not just your code styling, but it's the code styling of the project. Whenever a developer enters into the project, that is also, it's important that they continue the style, but it's important that if you enter into a project that you continue the style that's already been established by the original developer. Feel free to clean things up. But try not to modify everything unless you are taking over the project entirely. So let's get to work. I believe that you'll make employers and people that hire you to do individual jobs as a contractor possibly, and especially your other developers will be so happy that you're heading this direction. So if you want to contribute to this, feel free to add more examples, add more filters, but at least let's go through a few examples right now. So CSS. I've got this project already cloned, and so to give you real-world editing, let's jump over to my editor. So we'll jump back one folder. Let's create, actually I don't even need to create, I just need to change directories into, oh, about to lose battery. Need to move into the clean, yeah, right, cleaner code. And so I'm going to open this up in Sublime Text. I'm going to go full screen, probably need to bump up my font size so you guys can see it, but let's be consistent. So we're going to follow this for a little bit. I'm going to bump it up just a little bit. Slide this over. So first thing you'll want to see is some of these have, some of this in CSS, and I'm taking it that you know how to write CSS, at least learning how, is that once you start doing one thing, we want to continue it. And so I'm going to be fixing them in this way, except for the first thing I see is I don't write HTML to where I've got the closing bracket at the end of the line, unless there's only one declaration, like if it was just width here and no height. So I'm already seeing that they're dividing the declarations of the class, but also what they're targeting. I'm going to go ahead and break this down. It's just how I operate, and I see that they're doing the exact same thing on some other lines. So in this example, in all examples, I try to give an idea of maybe who we're working for. So manufacturing plant with an admin panel, that's just fun. And I'm going to go ahead and continue editing this. So looks like width and height, and auto could be, or the auto height could be rearranged. I don't see any commas in this line. In some cases, if it's just one, I might just bring it to one line, but in case that it's got 3 large classes, I'm going to go ahead and pull it down, bring this closing bracket to the bottom. Same thing, that's great. Everything looks good here. I might do the same thing with this line, and I'm interested to see, okay, so I see that this one has commas, and I like this if the commas are separated and there's quite a big list here. Let's see, because this one goes off the page. Looks like we can divide this up. And I bet there's even a cleaner way that this can be approached, but this is at least how I would tackle this. All right, bring that to the end. And I think this is one that needs to go down. This one has commas, so I'm going to pull that down as well, just like we saw here. All right, so now we've got more consistency. I see one more thing. This needs to be brought up a line to be consistent with the rest of the lines. They're all bumping up against each other and still legible. So this is how I would clean this one up. And then let's go through one more maybe. So we'll do, let's try maybe descriptive here. So it looks like JavaScript for tip tracking calculator. This is actually the example I gave earlier, but use descriptive names, variables, classes, and functions. So we're looking for total. So maybe total, let's double click that. We see a few to edit here. So we're going to do total tips. We'll look at total again, see how many I need to edit. So total tips, it starts at 0, and we calculate the tips. Here, calculate tips doesn't help as much, but it looks like I am adding all the tips together with this reducer. So let's add all tips. And then I'm going to use this here. And then we got show tips. Show tips. Show tips is averaging the tips. So yeah, average all tips. You could do add tips or some, maybe do some tips. I think that's better. Some tips and average tips. We can get rid of all and keep it concise. So show tips, average tips here, average, well, I might even add all back in so I can use that variable. Sum all tips, add all tips, total tips, average tips. Here, it looks like we're good. So it looks like we have an output. We want to give this a test inside of CodePen. So back to browser, opening up CodePen, going to move to /pin for a new pin, slide JavaScript all the way over, and if I console log these two out, let's see what I get. So make a new line. Let's see what is spit out. Looks like one thing I'll need to do is make sure I compile Babel because I'm using ES 2015. Save and close. And I'm wondering if there's anything I'm using here. Reduce array. So let's see what total tips is. 0. Well, that's not cool. And then looks like we need to update that guy right here. We'll do that here as well. It's keeping everything in sync. Total tips, list, length, that's all stayed the same. Array total size. Everything's pretty good here. I'm going to pull this in one more time. See what I get. Oh, I never updated my function here. And so everything is not going to work. All right, so yeah, now I've got my output, and let's compare these two outputs with what is in the repo. Everything looks good. And 2, 3, 6, 4, 7, 2. Yeah, everything was great. So that worked out well. So not only did I refactor, but everything still operates the way it should. And that's how you refactor code. So if you want to go through any of these other examples, try to clean things up, and this is a good example of how things might be off a little bit, not just horrible or bad, but how you might be able to clean things up along the way. Also, if you want to contribute, happy to have some people add to it. All right, see you guys.